Hi there. I'm Celine. My mom kicked me out of her wedding, her big day, said I wasn't good enough to be part of it. But that wasn't the worst part. Behind the flowers, the fancy dresses, the picture-perfect smiles, they were hiding something bigger. They'd spent years erasing me, not just from the guest list, but from the family, from the future. And when I finally walked away, everything they'd built came crashing down. But here's the thing. When your own mother turns you into the villain of her fairy tale, what choice do you have? You think the wedding was the real drama? Wait until you hear what happened after. It was almost closing time at my flower shop in Charleston when my phone buzzed on the counter. The soft hum of the AC blended with the faint scent of lilies and damp eucalyptus hanging in the air. I was trimming the last bouquet of the day, the kind of peaceful moment I usually enjoyed, until that text shattered everything. Celine, I think it's better if you don't attend the wedding. It's for the best. For a second, I thought I'd misread it. My fingers froze over the stems, my thumb still pressing the shears mid-snap. I blinked, rereading those cold, calculated words from my own mother. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was real. She didn't want me there, on her wedding day. I stared at the screen as if I could will the words to change, but they didn't. They sat there, flat and final, like a verdict handed down in a courtroom I didn't even know I was being tried in. It wasn't the first time my mother, Drusilla, had decided I wasn't good enough. But this was different. This was the final nail. My chest tightened, a slow, dull ache spreading beneath my ribs. I glanced around my tiny shop, where every corner held memories of me holding this family together. And now, they had decided to move forward without me. I set the shears down and leaned against the counter, the weight of the text crashing over me like cold water. Then, as if my mind needed to torture me further, the memory hit. It was a month ago, during one of those early May mornings when the Charleston air smelled like rain and magnolia. I had just finished arranging peonies when my mother walked into the shop, elegant as always, her smile sharp as a knife. She didn't waste time. "Celine, we need to talk," she said, voice tight, eyes avoiding mine. I wiped my hands and waited. "You don't really fit the image we're going for," she continued, tone so polished it cut deeper. "The bridesmaid thing? Maybe it's best you step back." The words sliced through me that day like paper cuts, thin, precise, and somehow more painful because of how politely she delivered them. I'd laughed awkwardly, thinking it was a bad joke, but her face told me it wasn't. Now, a month later, she had made it official. Not only was I not standing beside her, I wasn't welcome at all. I walked slowly to the back of the shop, shutting off the lights one by one, letting the shadows creep in as the sun dipped below the Charleston skyline. My legs felt heavier with each step, my chest tightening as my mind kept replaying that message. How did I get here? How did I become the outsider in my own family? My mind flashed back to the countless nights I stayed up, covering rent when Mom was short, helping my sister Aurelia clean up her messes, taking care of everyone while no one ever thought to check if I was okay. And now, I was nothing more than a liability in their perfect little narrative. My phone buzzed again. Aurelia had posted a photo on Instagram. The perfect family wedding, no drama, just love. The caption sliced deeper than any text. The picture? My mother, Aurelia, and a circle of smiling bridesmaids laughing under Charleston's soft evening glow. I wasn't in it. I wasn't even mentioned. That's when something inside me shifted. Something quiet, heavy, but sharp. I locked the shop, the keys cold against my palm. My footsteps echoed on the pavement as I walked home, every sound amplified in the thick, humid night. By the time I reached my apartment, I didn't feel sadness anymore. I felt hollow. Standing in front of my bathroom mirror, I studied my reflection like I was looking at a stranger. My voice cracked the silence when I whispered, "If they've erased me, maybe it's time I erase them too." No more waiting to be invited. No more hoping for crumbs. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. my mind racing until exhaustion finally dragged me under. The next morning, I woke up to a name I hadn't heard in months lighting up my phone. The name glowing on my phone screen stopped me cold. Junia. I hadn't heard from her in months, not since that last family dinner, where she quietly slid me an extra plate and murmured, "You shouldn't let them treat you like this." She was the only one who ever looked me in the eye when the rest of them pretended I wasn't even there. So when her name popped up at 7 in the morning, I already knew it wasn't good. I answered anyway. "Junia?" Her voice came through, hushed, almost apologetic. "Celine, I didn't want to be the one to say this, but Mom asked me to call you." My stomach dropped. "She wanted me to make sure you don't show up today," Junia continued quickly, as if ripping off a Band-Aid. "She said it's better for everyone's peace." There it was. That phrase again. Peace. As if my existence had ever disturbed theirs, like a storm cloud ruining their sunny little world. I didn't respond right away. I let the words settle in the silence, heavy and sharp. "Message received," I finally said, my voice flat. Junia tried to soften the blow. "Celine, I don't agree with her. You don't deserve this." But I'd already tuned her out. It wasn't about whether I deserved it anymore. They'd made their decision. After the call ended, I sat at the edge of my bed, staring at the sunlight slicing through the blinds. Outside, Charleston was stirring awake, church bells ringing, birdsong floating on the breeze, the hum of wedding preparations everywhere. It was supposed to be my mother's perfect day, and apparently it required me to vanish. The walls of my apartment suddenly felt too small, the air too heavy. I grabbed my keys and jacket without thinking, needing to move, to breathe, to not feel the weight of that phone call pressing on my chest. I drove aimlessly through the streets of Charleston, past tourists holding coffee cups, couples in pastel clothes, friends gathering for a celebration I was explicitly uninvited to. Every corner of this city held some memory of me. Every street whispered of the years I spent holding my family's pieces together. And now I wasn't even an afterthought. I don't know what made me do it, but before noon, I found myself parked across the street from the Belmont Hotel, the wedding venue. I had no intention of going inside, but curiosity is a cruel thing. It doesn't let you look away when you should. So I stood there, arms crossed tightly over my chest, and watched. Guests arrived in clusters, laughing, posing for photos. Everyone perfectly dressed, perfectly happy. And then I saw her. My mother. Drusilla moved through the crowd like a queen, her veil pinned perfectly, her smile rehearsed. She was speaking to the hotel manager, but her voice carried across the street, slicing through the morning like glass. "If she sets foot in here, throw her out. She's not family." She didn't say my name. She didn't have to. The words hit harder than I expected, like a punch to the ribs. I stood frozen on the sidewalk, watching her turn away like I was nothing but a shadow. After a few long minutes, I finally climbed back into my car, the numbness crawling over me like a second skin. I drove without direction, the streets of Charleston blurring past. Hours slipped away without me noticing. By the time the sun began to fall behind the skyline, I found myself at the waterfront. The boardwalk was nearly empty now, a few tourists lingering, the sound of seagulls fading into the breeze. I walked slowly toward the edge of the beach, the tide stretching out like something soft and cruel at the same time. And standing there, with the horizon burning gold in front of me, it finally hit me. They'd spent years carving out their perfect little world, and when I didn't fit their picture, they erased me. Fine. If they wanted me gone, I could disappear. But not on their terms. I took one long breath, letting the ocean air settle deep in my lungs. If they wanted me erased, I whispered to no one, I'll vanish, but on my own terms. That night, back in my apartment, the ache in my chest hadn't disappeared, but it felt different, heavier, sharper. And finally, I reached for the envelope Caspian had left me weeks ago, the one I'd ignored, unopened, because I wasn't ready to face whatever truth it carried. I broke the seal and unfolded the papers inside. And everything changed. I unfolded the envelope with the kind of care you'd give to something fragile, something dangerous. Caspian's handwriting stared back at me, clean, precise, almost clinical. Inside was a copy of a marriage contract. At first glance, it looked like any formal agreement. Typed lines, neat signatures, legal jargon designed to put people to sleep. But as I read, my pulse started to pound in my ears. There it was, buried deep in the clauses. Upon the completion of marriage, all shared assets, including the family estate and financial holdings, would fall solely under the control of Silas Wren, my mother's soon-to-be husband. A quiet breath slipped past my lips. I read it again, slower this time, tracing each word like I was peeling back the skin of a wound. My name wasn't there. Aurelia's name wasn't there. Only theirs, Drusilla and Silas, binding themselves together in a contract that effectively erased both her daughters from the picture. It wasn't just about the wedding anymore. This wasn't some emotional fallout or family spat. This was calculated. I leaned back on my sofa, the soft hum of the ceiling fan suddenly too loud in the silence. My mind swirled, images flashing, the cold text from Mom, Aurelia's picture-perfect Instagram post, the public rejection outside the Belmont Hotel. It wasn't personal, it was business. My phone buzzed again. I ignored it. I needed air. Pulling on a sweatshirt, I stepped outside into the Charleston night. The humidity clung to my skin like sweat, the streets mostly empty except for the occasional car rolling by. I walked without thinking, down streets I'd memorized over the years, until I reached the little cafe Caspian and I used to meet at after late shifts. That's when the memory hit. 2 weeks before the wedding, I had dropped by Mom's house to deliver floral samples she asked for. She wasn't home, but the front door was unlocked. I'd walked in, placed the samples on the kitchen counter, and noticed the study door slightly ajar. Out of habit, curiosity, or maybe something more, I peeked inside. That's when I saw it. That same marriage contract sitting on Silas's desk. It had caught my eye not because of the thick stack of legal papers, but because my mother's name was there, without mine or Aurelia's anywhere in sight. Back then, I hadn't thought much of it. I was used to being overlooked, but now, standing in the middle of an empty street, it all clicked like dominoes falling. Caspian's voice echoed in my head from a conversation weeks ago when he'd warned me. Celine, Silas did this before. 2 wives, both left with nothing but bills and heartbreak. I hadn't wanted to believe him then. I wanted to believe my mother wouldn't fall for a man who'd used, drained, and discarded women like expired credit cards. But that contract in my hand proved otherwise. I walked home slower than usual, my steps heavy with realization. By the time I reached my apartment, the ache inside me had sharpened into something colder. They didn't just leave me off the guest list. They'd left me off the entire future they were building. One where I didn't exist. Not just emotionally, but legally, financially, permanently. Every little slight, every offhand comment over the years, every time Mom brushed past me in favor of Aurelia, they weren't accidents. They were conditioning. They wanted me gone long before this wedding. The wedding was just the final act. I dropped onto the edge of my bed, staring at the ceiling fan slicing the air. They didn't just erase me, they sold me out. Somewhere beneath the dull ache in my chest, something cracked open. Not sadness, not grief. Anger. Real, bone-deep, unshakable anger. For the first time in years, I let it settle in my veins like a spark waiting for flame. This isn't over. The next morning, a new rumor about me started spreading like wildfire, and I knew exactly who lit the match. The rumor spread like wildfire, faster than I expected, but exactly how I should have known it would. By noon, 3 different people had sent me the same message, as if I hadn't already heard it whispered beneath the breath of every family member who smiled too wide and cared too little. Celine's unstable. She threatened to ruin the wedding. She's out of control. It would have been almost funny if it hadn't felt so familiar, the way my family always twisted the truth until it became a weapon. At first, I thought about letting it burn itself out. Let them talk. Let them paint me as the villain. But then Junia texted, "You should come tonight. Rehearsal dinner at the Belmont. Be seen." I stared at the screen, wondering why I should even bother. Why walk straight into the lion's den when I already knew they wanted me mauled? But something inside me, something sharp and stubborn, told me I needed to show up. Not to explain, not to plead, but to remind them I was still standing. That evening, the Belmont was glowing like a Christmas postcard. White lights strung around the columns, waiters gliding between tables with trays of champagne, everything curated to look perfect. I slipped in quietly, unnoticed at first. But eyes always find you when they want you to disappear. Caspian found me near the doorway. He didn't say much, just gave me that look, half warning, half worried. "You sure?" he asked under his breath. "They don't get to write my ending," I replied. The evening unfolded like a play. Laughter where it belonged, fake smiles exchanged like business cards. Until the groom took the microphone. Silas stood tall, smug, one arm casually draped around my mother, like he already owned her. And everything else. "To family," he started, voice honey-sweet. "Those who know when their time is over." The guests laughed, politely, nervously, but his eyes locked on mine when he added, "Some people just don't know when they're no longer needed." The smile never left his lips, but the message hit like a slap. I kept my face still, my hand tight around the glass. Then my mother took the mic. "Every mother dreams of children who bring them joy," she said sweetly. "Sadly, we don't always get what we want." Her eyes didn't leave mine. The room went silent. No one said a word. Caspian leaned in. "They're trying to break you tonight," he whispered. I set my glass down carefully and stood. The chatter faded. Forks paused midair. I walked toward the exit without looking back, until I did. My voice stayed calm even. "Be careful," I said, meeting both their eyes. "Even shadows have limits." And then I left. Outside, Charleston felt like a different world. The hum of traffic, the quiet pulse of life moving forward like nothing had happened inside that ballroom. I kept walking, letting the air cool the weight pressing on my chest. At the corner, beneath the street lamp glow, I stopped and breathed it all in. That night, lying awake, staring at the ceiling, something inside me shifted. The next move would be mine. And this time, I wouldn't play nice. 3 days before the wedding, my phone lit up before sunrise. The city outside my window was still dark, the air heavy with the kind of stillness that only comes right before something terrible happens. When I reached for the phone, half expecting another empty apology or a cold demand, I found Caspian's name instead. His message was short. "Aurelia's telling people you're trying to ruin the wedding." I sat up, the weight of those words sinking straight to my stomach like a stone. Of course she was. It wasn't enough to exclude me. Now they needed to burn my name, too. I stared at the screen, rereading the message over and over as if it would suddenly make sense. It didn't. By mid-morning, I saw the evidence for myself. 2 posts, subtle but clear enough if you knew how to read between the lines. One from one of Aurelia's friends. "Some people really can't stand seeing others happy." Another from a distant cousin. "Family drama is exhausting. Let people celebrate without your baggage." I didn't need a name tagged to know who they meant. I spent the next hour pacing the length of my living room, the same sentence rattling in my head like static. "She's telling everyone you're trying to ruin the wedding." It was the final push. Not Mom, not Silas, Aurelia. The person I thought would at least hesitate before driving the knife in. Before I could talk myself out of it, I dialed her number. She picked up after the second ring. "Celine," Aurelia said, voice cool like the static buzz of a radio signal I'd forgotten how to tune. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, skipping past the small talk, my throat tight with something dangerously close to grief. She didn't miss a beat. "You're jealous, Celine. You always have been." I blinked, the words slicing sharper than I expected. You hate seeing Mom happy, she continued, like she'd been rehearsing the line for weeks. You can't stand not being the center of attention. The laugh that escaped me wasn't soft. It was bitter, hollow. You really believe that? You can't help yourself, she said. You live for chaos. I swallowed the lump forming at the back of my throat, my hand tightening around the edge of the kitchen counter. She meant every word. She wasn't saying it to provoke me. She genuinely believed I was the villain in her story. We ended the call without resolution, her voice turning cold, mine turning to ice. That evening, after I closed the shop and the streets began to empty, my phone buzzed again. Aurelia, one message this time, no flourish, no pretense. If you really love Mom, you won't show up. Don't ruin her day. I stared at it longer than I should have, the words sinking into my bones like frostbite. If you really love Mom, as if love meant stepping aside quietly while they erased me. I set the phone down, walked to the window, and watched the city lights flicker in the distance. I'd spent years making myself smaller so they could feel big. I'd spent even longer hoping they'd eventually see me. But this wasn't misunderstanding anymore. It was strategy. I walked back to the counter, picked up my phone, and typed slowly, deliberately. If you keep pushing me out, don't be surprised when I stop staying quiet. I hit send and set the phone face down. Tomorrow, they'd understand what it meant when the quiet one finally spoke. The cafe was quiet when I arrived the next morning. One of those downtown places tucked between old brick buildings, smelling faintly of espresso and polished wood. The kind of place where no one paid attention to you unless you asked for it. Caspian was already there, seated at a corner table, a manila folder resting on the table like a loaded weapon. He glanced up when I walked in, and without a word, slid the folder toward me as I sat down. I pulled it open, expecting receipts or half-hearted gossip. But it wasn't that. Inside were copies of documents I hadn't seen before. Detailed records. A full copy of the marriage contract I'd first glimpsed weeks ago, but this time annotated, highlighted. And stapled neatly behind it were bank statements, court records, legal filings, a trail of Silas's past. 2 former marriages, 2 women left in financial ruin. Assets transferred quietly, systematically. I scanned the pages, my heart pounding faster with every line I read. My mother's name, the date of the wedding, the clause that effectively gave Silas control of everything, including what should have been mine and Aurelia's inheritance. When I looked up, Caspian was watching me carefully, his hands wrapped around his coffee mug. "Why are you doing this?" I asked quietly. He exhaled slowly. "Because someone should have protected you a long time ago." I swallowed, unsure how to carry the weight of that simple truth. "You've spent your whole life cleaning up their mess," Caspian continued. "Maybe it's time to clean your own slate." The words settled over me like an anchor. Heavy, grounding. For years, I'd been the one who showed up. The one who fixed things. The one who swallowed her pride so everyone else could save face. Maybe it was time to stop playing that part. I folded the folder closed carefully, like sealing something fragile, and stood. "Thank you," I said, meaning it. He nodded once. "Whatever you do next, don't do it for them. Do it for you." I left the cafe and walked back to my apartment, the folder clutched tight in my hands. The sun was high by then, the streets humming with people preparing for the wedding weekend. Delivery trucks, florists, caterers rushing in and out of venues. Charleston was dressing itself up for a show I was never supposed to be in. I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, and stared at the screen for a long time. And then, without hesitation, I picked up the phone and called my family's lawyer. It took 3 rings before he answered, his voice formal but polite. "Celine? What can I do for you?" I told him everything. I sent him the documents Caspian had gathered, every highlighted line, every damning clause. I explained the pattern, the way it had happened before, the way it was happening again. When I finished, there was a long pause on the line. "You understand what you're asking me to do," he said carefully. I do. You're aware this could tear your family apart? I almost laughed. That ship had sailed a long time ago. I want this marriage stopped, I said calmly, and I want them to know exactly why. The lawyer hesitated. I can prepare an injunction, but it will cause a public scene. Good. Let it be public. Let the truth crawl out into the light. Before we ended the call, I added one last thing. Make sure they can't erase me this time. That night, I slept differently. Not well, but with a strange kind of calm, like something inside me had finally settled. The next day, as the guests arrived in their finest clothes, the first cracks in their perfect day started to show. By noon, the Belmont Hotel looked like something out of a Southern wedding magazine. Pristine white arches, silk ribbons fluttering in the breeze, and guests arriving in their finest clothes, sipping champagne, as if nothing in the world could possibly go wrong. But I knew better. From the window of the cafe across the street, I watched them arrive. Uncles in pressed suits, cousins in pastel dresses, old family friends lining up to witness the show. They had no idea the curtain was about to fall. Inside the hotel ballroom, my mother stood radiant under the chandelier light, veil pinned perfectly, lips stretched into a smile wide enough to crack. Silas stood beside her, smug and polished as ever, one hand resting possessively on her back. The picture of happiness, if you didn't look too close. Somewhere behind them, Caspian lingered near the back of the room, his posture casual, but his gaze sharp, scanning every corner like he was waiting for the sky to cave in. It didn't take long. The first sign came in the form of two men in dark suits slipping past the crowd, moving straight toward the front. I saw the shift ripple across the room, whispers, heads turning, the tension sharp enough to slice through silk. One of the men, our family lawyer, approached my mother, leaning in close enough that only she and Silas could hear. The smile slid right off her face. Silas's jaw clenched so hard I could see it from across the street. The announcement came minutes later. The wedding ceremony had been temporarily delayed due to unforeseen legal circumstances. I almost laughed at how politely they phrased it, as if this wasn't a bomb dropped in the middle of their perfect day. The whispers spread like wildfire. By the time I crossed the street and slipped quietly into the hotel lobby, the ballroom was already unraveling. Guests shuffled uneasily, murmuring behind cupped hands. Phones were out, messages flying faster than the waitstaff could refill the champagne, and then the doors to the side hallway burst open. Silas stormed in, his face red, voice rising over the chaos. "This is her!" he shouted, pointing toward me like I was a criminal on trial. "She planted this! This is her revenge." Eyes turned toward me like floodlights. I didn't flinch. I met his gaze evenly, the calm in my chest unfamiliar but steady. People were recording now. I could see the glint of phones held up like shields, capturing every moment. Aurelia's voice came next, sharp and brittle over the crowd noise. She wasn't even in the room. It was a voicemail buzzing on my phone seconds after Silas's outburst. "You ruined everything," she snapped. "I hope you're happy. You destroyed the only family you had left." I listened to it twice, letting the words wash over me like cold rain. The thing about blame is that it always finds the easiest target. Junia's message came not long after. "They're all blaming you," she wrote. "But you did the right thing." Somewhere deep inside, I wanted to believe her. But in that moment, standing in the middle of the wreckage, all I felt was exhaustion. I thought it was over. I thought the worst had passed. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement at the front of the room. My mother had grabbed the microphone. The air in the ballroom felt heavier the moment my mother's fingers wrapped around the microphone. Her smile was gone, her posture stiff. It wasn't the poised, gracious host everyone had seen earlier. It was a woman unraveling, thread by thread, in front of an audience too stunned to look away. I stood frozen near the back, breath caught halfway in my throat. She cleared her throat, voice slicing through the nervous murmurs like broken glass. "You all came here today," she began, her tone shaking but forced into something sweet, "to witness love, to celebrate new beginnings. Some people nodded politely, unsure where this was going. But what no one tells you, she continued, voice rising, is that family isn't always what it looks like in pictures. A pause, a shift. Her gaze snapped to me across the room, sharp as a blade. From the moment she was born, my mother said, her voice cracking but clear, Celine has been nothing but a burden. The words hit harder than I expected, like someone had knocked the wind clean out of me. The entire ballroom fell silent. You could have heard a pin drop between the gasps and uncomfortable shuffling. For a moment, I swore the chandelier above us flickered, like even the lights couldn't stand what was happening. Somewhere near the front, Caspian's jaw tightened. Junia stood frozen, her phone forgotten in her hand. I could feel everyone's eyes shift to me. The invisible daughter, the problem child, now painted plainly for all to see. I don't know how long I stood there, my heart pounding loud in my ears, before something inside me snapped. Not in anger, not even in sadness, just finality. I took a breath, straightened my shoulders, and walked slowly, deliberately, toward the front of the room. The crowd parted like water. When I reached the edge of the dance floor, I looked up at my mother, who still clutched the microphone like it was the only thing holding her up. "You wanted me erased?" I said, my voice steady, clear. "Congratulations!" I stepped back, sweeping my gaze across the stunned, whispering guests. "I'm gone." Without waiting for her reply, without so much as a glance toward Silas or Aurelia, I turned and walked away. The sound of my heels on the marble echoed louder than the shocked silence. Outside, the Charleston sun had begun to sink, the sky awash in amber and lavender streaks. The evening breeze wrapped around me like a promise of something better. By the time I reached the street, I heard the commotion behind me, more shouting, more chaos, but none of it mattered anymore. Later that night, I heard the rest through text messages and voicemails I didn't bother answering. Silas had left immediately after the ceremony collapsed, vanishing without a trace, taking with him whatever was left of their carefully curated fairy tale. The guests had scattered, many of them whispering about betrayal, scandal, bad blood. My mother's phone, according to Junia, had been ringing nonstop with reporters, relatives, friends who suddenly didn't want to be associated with the disaster. Aurelia didn't reach out, not a word, not even another blame-laced voicemail. Everything they'd built, the image, the performance, the illusion, crumbled in one afternoon. And I'd walked away from the wreckage without looking back. Weeks later, I received one last message, and it wasn't from the person I expected. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the message came. The sky over Charleston was gray that day, heavy with the kind of spring rain that threatened but never quite fell. I was sorting through invoices at my desk, half listening to a podcast playing low in the background, when my phone buzzed against the wooden surface. It was from Aurelia. I stared at the screen for a long moment before opening it. "Mom's not doing well. She keeps talking about you." That was all it said. No apology, no anger, no punctuation, just a sentence hanging like an unfinished thought. I set the phone down and leaned back, feeling the weight of those words settle in my chest like wet sand. For weeks after the wedding collapsed, I hadn't heard a thing from either of them. I thought that silence was the end. Apparently, it wasn't. That evening, I met Caspian at a small bar near the waterfront. He slid into the booth across from me, a file tucked beneath his arm. Without a word, he passed it over. Inside was a USB drive and a short printed transcript. "One of the old housekeepers sent this to me," he explained quietly. "She thought you should know." I plugged the drive into my laptop when I got home. The recording wasn't long, just under 3 minutes, but it felt like a punch to the stomach. My mother's voice, unmistakable, cold as ice, even on tape. "Celine's unstable. She ruins everything she touches. That's why I had to keep her away." The same lie, the same cruel branding, only this time spoken casually, to someone she thought didn't matter. That's where it started. The whispers, the rumors, the unspoken explanation that made it easier for people to justify my absence at every family gathering, every milestone. Not because I was difficult, but because it was easier to believe I was broken. I closed the laptop and sat there in the dim light, listening to the quiet hum of the city outside. It didn't hurt the way I thought it would. It didn't destroy me. It just made everything make sense. A few days later, I drove out to the old neighborhood, past streets that used to feel like home. I parked a block away from my mother's building, stepped out, and stood there for a long time, staring at the front door I'd walked through 1,000 times before. But I didn't go in. There was nothing left to say. Somewhere between the betrayal and the lies, and the years of bending myself into shapes that would never be enough, I'd finally stopped needing her to see me. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. Sometimes, it just means letting yourself live again. Before I left, I pulled out my phone and typed one last message. I hope one day you can be happy without needing to hurt me first. I didn't wait for a reply. Weeks passed. The city moved on, the gossip faded, the scandal became old news, and I started over. I reopened my flower shop, smaller this time, tucked into a quieter street, where the customers came not because of who I used to be, but because of what I could offer now. Caspian stopped by often, usually with coffee. Junia sent pictures of her kids, messages filled with laughter and updates. A different kind of family. One I chose. Some wounds don't heal perfectly, but they stop bleeding eventually. That evening, as I locked up the shop and stepped outside into the cool Charleston night, I smiled. Not because everything was perfect, but because I finally knew it didn't have to be. For so long, I believed that family meant sacrificing yourself to keep the peace, that if I bent far enough, stayed quiet long enough, maybe one day they'd finally see me. But here's the truth no one tells you. Sometimes, family isn't who shares your blood. It's who shows up when the room is empty, who listens without expecting you to shrink yourself to fit their story. Walking away wasn't easy. It never is. But peace doesn't come from waiting for people who keep proving they don't value you. It comes from finally valuing yourself. And now, I want to ask you something. Have you ever stayed too long in a place, a relationship, a family that kept asking you to be less just so they could feel more? What would happen if, for once, you chose yourself? Drop a 1 in the comments if this story made you stop and think about your own boundaries. Or tell me where you're watching from. I'd love to know how far this story traveled. And if this story wasn't for you, that's okay too. Let me know why. Your voice matters here. And if you want to hear more real stories about family, love, loss, and finding yourself again, hit that subscribe button and join this little community we're building. Because at the end of the day, we're all just trying to find a place where we belong.